Back in the early 2000s, trends in horror were coming and going. What seemed to finally be phasing out was the slasher film. What was dawning upon the next phase for horror were the grotesque chillers like Saw or Hostel. Even before those, however, the zombie market experienced an early surge that would take the genre by storm years later. Films like Resident Evil were being produced for a quick dollar, and they were doing just that, so an early array into zombies was sought after. Danny Boyle came along in 2002 and made 28 Days Later, something I talked about in my first year of Octoberfest. Where that film stood out was in its low-budget filmmaking, shooting on DV tape for a dirty look, and its methods of guerrilla filmmaking that made it a success with audiences and critics. Beneath that as well seemed to be a social commentary on the state of the world that people had looked into, and I'll leave that for you guys to look into as well. I don't think the zombie craze has experienced something quite as artsy as Boyle's film was entailing. More thought was put into the aesthetic and storyline than most of the modern cliched zombie romps we've seen lately. 5 years later, a sequel arrived, this time called 28 Weeks Later. A new cast and new storyline is brought forth, and what results is something that's just kind of a shell of its predecessor. In this film, the virus is originally thought to be dwindling away after about 6 months of the original film. Unfortunately, those theories are quickly found to be untrue and more zombie-filled mayhem ensues. It's tough to really talk about this film without referring back to the original too much. Don't get me wrong, this film isn't that bad per se, but the main problem is that it's a more polished version of the original, which isn't a good thing. This one feels a little too Hollywood for me. It doesn't have that kind of dirty quality that the original really benefited from. Additionally, it just feels like it's trying to outdo the original too much. It doesn't leave the same kind of impression that you got from the first one. That's the problem. It's so hard to talk about this movie as its own entity. At the time, this could really just be seen as another novelty into undead filmmaking, with films like I Am Legend doing essentially the same thing later that year, but with a bigger budget. I'm not sure if anyone saw the whole zombie craze coming as hard as it did, especially after lukewarm films like 28 Weeks Later and I Am Legend. This film is at least moderately entertaining, but as a follow-up to a pivotal horror film of its time, it really doesn't hold up.